So let's get cracking to what we really are here for today. Let me introduce to you our very first speaker. He's Ernest Lewis. Ernest is a very dear friend of ours because he comes with a lot of experience. He's currently the podcast editor for the Straits Times as well as the Business Times, and he's been a veteran journalist since 1995. And currently, he's been spearheading the audio content generation, that is podcasts, for SPH as well as Business Times. Now, he also comes in to volunteer for us on CatholicSG Radio, and he's also been helping out with the RCIA program. So without further ado, let's hear Ernest's podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the segment Storytelling Through Podcasts. I'm Ernest Lewis, and in my job, I'm the podcast editor for the Straits Times and the Business Times. When I started volunteering for CatholicSG Radio last year, I found some big differences between doing secular podcasts for work and podcasts for CatholicSG Radio. First things first, we actually start with a prayer before recording. I find that is really different, and that's something very reassuring and calming. And it's not just, let's say, me and my guests, which I feel is all the time at work. But in a CatholicSG Radio podcast, it's different. I feel that there are three people with me: myself, the guest, and the Holy Spirit. And in some way, the Holy Spirit is also guiding me away from the script sometimes to explore different facets of the person's faith. For example, in this new program on CatholicSG Radio called The Faith Journal, which I co-host with my childhood friend Raymond Francis, my role is simply to bring out the person I'm talking to in 10 minutes. It's not long-winded, but I try to make the guests I speak to feel that this is not just another Q&A, but discovering a way to express his or her faith despite the challenges of life. Reading and recording for God, especially with the Office of Readings, is something really different I have found. That helps the Word of God sink deeper into me as a volunteer. So you'll be asking and you'll be wondering, how do you get started in creating a simple podcast or audio interview? Well, I would recommend don't be bogged down too much by starting a channel for your own parish, for example. Why not start off with CatholicSG Radio, for example? They already have a team. All you have to do is just submit audio stories from your own parish then. Take your parish priest, is he a durian lover? Talk to him about durians and how he sustains himself with God's nourishment in other ways. What about your longtime parish compound caretaker? Has anyone really bothered to talk to him all these years? CatholicSG Radio can always help guide you with audio interview ideas and recording techniques, remotely, especially during Singapore's COVID-19 circuit breaker period now. But tell you what, let's slow this down. Don't listen to me anymore. Just listen to yourself, deep down. And if you hear the call, why not explore your Catholic faith and the faith of your brothers and sisters and tell compelling faith stories through audio and podcasts?
And that was Ernest, and now let's listen to Nicole. Nicole is our Singapore-based podcaster. She's actually an educator. And it's very inspiring to hear from Nicole because, she's taken that very brave new step to tell her stories and her challenges with podcasts. And so listen to this. And you can actually listen to her podcast on Spotify called Nourish the Soul.
And welcome back to another episode of Nourish the Soul with Nicole. So very exciting news. World Communication Sunday is coming up, and our Holy Father has actually talked about the power of storytelling. And it made me really reflect about how I started on this podcast journey in the first place. Just a year ago, right, I actually had no concept of what a podcast was, but I felt a deep stirring in my heart to actually spread the faith and engage others in conversations about the faith through the means of podcasts, and by that means also storytelling. So a year ago, I started this podcast. At first, I was just actually reaching out to others in terms of giving my own personal reflection on the Sunday's readings. And then it soon evolved into a very interesting dialogue with the people that were listening to my podcast. So it was actually firstly friends, family, and I encouraged them to really spread it to other people. Right? So for example, some of my friends overseas also started listening to it. And what I found was very touching was the kind of feelings and emotions that they felt while listening to me. They felt that they were listening to a friend speaking to them. And really, what I was doing was actually sharing my personal stories of how I was actually going through struggles in the faith, right? As well as very common issues that I felt that a lot of people, right, my age, as well as people in the modern world were actually facing. For example, some of my episodes are about expectations versus reality, for example, finding God, discernment. And I even had a recent series on 1 Corinthians 13. I had a Lenten series. And it's quite interesting how a lot of the time, right, people do come to the faith and get engaged through this power of storytelling. And I tell a lot of the stories of myself. I really do talk about, different issues that I hope that people can connect with and engage with. And I try and keep it, as real and genuine as possible. I think what people can really engage with, right, is when we don't really always have the answers all the time, but it's just that we're trying to kind of encourage discussion. So in this particular podcast, I really have tried my best to engage people, right, on a deeper level in terms of like issues of the faith. Sometimes it's meaty issues, it takes a little bit more time to unpack, but sometimes it's just really on the go, how we feel, about Lent, the sense of detachment, for example, or for example, my recent series about walking with him using Stations of the Cross, and really bringing in my own personal reflection. Because there's a lot of things that we are kind of familiar with in the faith, but sometimes, kind of providing a personal perspective to it really helps people to approach him in a gentler way. And I was actually very deeply moved that some of my friends who have not been going to Mass, for example, or been away from the church, have been able to reconnect with him through my podcast because they feel that I'm not trying to, overtly tell them what to do or what not to do, but I'm trying to be a friend. I'm trying to be a friendly voice that is guiding back them to Christ. And I really do see a lot of potential in terms of using new media to evangelize and to reach out to everyone, believers and non-believers alike. Right? What it is just it's a platform, right, for us to engage with other people about issues of the faith, right, as well as to present the human face, the human voice, hearing God's voice through my voice. I think that's one of the most deeply moving things that I've heard some of my friends actually share with me.
So, Ernest, Nicole, thank you for being here. Now, I'm going to start with Ernest first. Ernest.
Hi, Val. Morning.
Hi, Val.
Hi, Nicole. Hi, Ernest. Okay, Ernest, first question to you. You're the professional podcaster here. Tell us, how popular really are podcasts these days?
So very quickly, just a quick history for everyone. It was actually quite popular in the late 2000s. And then after that, it was about 2005, 2004 to 2006. And then I think what sort of like decreased it in popularity was the advent of the smartphones. After Apple came out with the iPhone towards the late 2000s, and then the rest of the brands came in, then people started to watch more videos on their smartphones. And then podcasts started coming back in about 3-4 years ago in the US and the UK as well. In the UK and the US, they do have very long podcasts, about 1.5 hours sometimes. I found that in my experience in Singapore, podcasting really seemed to have started taking off maybe say since late last year. Before that, when I started about 2 years ago, it was still a little bit there, but it was just up and coming. Here in Singapore, the difference is that people have no patience to listen to 1 hour podcast or 1.5 hour podcast. We're not as long-winded as our US brothers and UK brothers, but I think most people here can listen for about 15 minutes, which is about the average journey of your MRT ride from the east to the city or the west to the city. Yeah. And I also think, right, because of the smartphone, right, what is the beauty of the podcast is that you can listen to a podcast, right? Once you trigger the podcast, right, in Spotify or Apple Podcasts or even Google Podcasts, what is the beauty of the podcast is that you can listen to it and then continue checking your email, your WhatsApp. Whereas when you're watching video, right, you really have to stick with that. So it's not easy. You can't check other things and all. The moment you check other things, you get out the video watching experience and all that. So I think that's interesting. You can multitask. You can iron your clothes while watching. You can iron your clothes while listening to Catholic SG Radio. I don't think you can do that while watching your favorite Korean drama. Yeah, that I would say is the difference.
Okay, I'm not sure about that. Sometimes I can multitask when it comes to Korean drama, okay, Ernest? Okay, but let's go on to the next question. And I'm going to switch over right now to Nicole. Nicole, you spoke a little bit about this in your earlier podcast, and for the benefit of everyone, actually, this was prepared for last year, not last year, sorry, last week, last Saturday. So that's why you hear her podcast saying like we're preparing this for World Communications Day. But of course, World Communications Day was last Sunday. So anyway, it's still relevant. So Nicole, question right now to you. You know, when you first started out doing podcasts, how difficult was it? I mean, what kind of problems did you face?
I think for me, actually, my main problem was that I'm quite a tech newbie. Like, I'm a tech noob. So I didn't really like get the idea of how to get my podcast actually online. Like I had a general idea of like what I wanted to do because actually very similar to like Ernest. I was also listening to a lot of podcasts on my way to work, and I was listening to one particular one, which is actually a group of women in the US. So it's quite long, as Ernest was saying, about 40 minutes, and I don't know how I managed to sit through the 40 minutes, but they did actually share very deep personal insights about like a book that they were reading by, I think, Father Jacques Philippe. And I found it very interesting because they were speaking to me like a friend. So that was very interesting. So that was like a initial seed, I think, in my mind. But most of the difficulties that I faced really were actually on the technical aspect. So I really went on to Google. I tried to like understand, how do people get podcasts on Spotify? And I realized that, it just goes down to a little bit of like hosting platforms, being able to record, as Ernest was saying, we can actually just use our smartphone, right? It's a very good starting point. And then after that, maybe as we go along, we'll gradually like kind of like upgrade our equipment and stuff. But for me, I feel like my basic equipment, which is like just my earpiece over here, right? It really does actually work quite well for me, except maybe there's a little bit of background noise I might have to edit out. But for me, actually, the most difficult thing was actually just really doing the technical aspect of it. Like over time, I think content generation is something that me and Ernest can also discuss. Like, how do we even come up with these kinds of ideas? But I think it's really God's grace that I managed to get my first episode out on the Spotify, because I do recall like just 1 year ago, I was like, an entire week I didn't understand what I was doing and what was happening. But suddenly I was like praying to the Spirit. I was like, oh Jesus, please, like if you want this, if you think that I should be doing some kind of podcast, maybe this thing will finally go up one day. And amazingly, somehow I was so amazed when I actually saw it come out on Spotify, like Nourish the Soul, and I have not looked back since then. Yeah.
Wonderful, Nicole. And definitely, if you want to go and check her out, you can go check it out on Spotify. We have not put Catholic SG Radio yet on Spotify, but we will be doing so sometime, hopefully soon, after we have also found the trick on how to put our content up there. But right now, I think there is a lot of interest coming in, and obviously from the chat, that people want to know, how do you start this podcast? So question to both Ernest as well as Nicole: is this very expensive to do? And do you have to use a lot of equipment? Like, do you have to suddenly run? I know we spoke about using the handphone a little bit, but really, what do you use? Okay, let's go with Ernest first.
Okay, so I just want to say to everyone, right? If you're coming in thinking that podcasts should be done by people with very deep voices and DJ type voices and glorious voices, like maybe say Andre Achak of Archcoms, do not think that. Do not even think about Andre. Do not be misled by all these things. I think what you really just need to focus on is people actually, when they listen to these things, right, they just appreciate that you are clear. You need to be clear in your voice. You don't have to have a very low voice or a very resonant voice. Just be clear. And I think really that will be the first thing that you can work on. I had to work on that. Sometimes on different days, if I don't drink enough water, I don't drink honey or whatever, my voice changes up and down. So I just try and make sure that I'm clear. That's all. And One thing is, I wasn't really an expert, and like Nicole, I just plunged into the deep end because someone at work said, why don't we try podcast? And then no one really knew much about it, how to go about it. Then they just assigned me, and then I just went into it. I kind of know now why God wanted me to do that at work, because a little bit full circle, 2 years later on, the skills that I picked up from work, I'm able now to pass it to the Catholic Church. I hope I'll be able to do that continuously. And the first thing first, if let's say like you don't need this, um, you just need this phone. Okay, so let's say if I had to start out as doing, let's say, a scripture reading. So we sometimes have volunteers doing scriptural readings for CatholicSG Radio. I do the office of readings also, so that's the same. If you are a lector, any of you are a lector out there, you will be used to this already. You just need to figure out how to record your voice cleanly and properly so that CatholicSG Radio can then carry it as an audio file. So there are a couple of things. A lot of people, what they will do is, and we've had volunteers in the past, so they will just take the phone, right? This is the cheapest thing you can have. Well, it's not cheap, but at least the simplest thing that most of us have. You don't even need an earpiece or fancy headphone yet, not yet. You just need this, right? Okay. So once you go in, all of us have the audio voice memo notes, right? On the phones. So for example, just very quickly, I don't know whether you can see. Yeah, the voice memo. Or you can't probably see it, I think. Yeah, voice memos, right? Yeah. On Android phones, I think it'll be the same thing. It's very easy to start recording. See the red button there? Yeah. Flip the phone upside down, because when we speak, right? When we speak, the voice gets captured here. So all you have to do is place it in front of you, upside down, and don't speak into this, not like those, sometimes, at the hawker center, I see aunties and all that. Hello, 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 hello. Don't do that. You just put it in front of you. Is this a good distance? I don't know whether you can see my phone, but just a little bit in front of you and just below your chin, just below the chin level. And then you start your reading, right? Because the voice goes just above the phone, and it doesn't sort of like compress too much into the phone. And then you start reading. Very simple technique. And the other thing is that a lot of us make mistakes when we start out our first recording, right? Someone's washing hands in the kitchen, dog is barking outside, maybe the plane is flying past. What you need to do is be conscious of all these sounds, close the door, try not to be in a large room, try to be in your own bedroom. That's best because you have a lot of clothes and you have your bed sheets and all that absorbs the sound. So do that first. Find a small room with soft furnishings. You guys can take notes if you want. Sit down, compose yourself. Make sure you can't hear any washing of hands and all. Now, I will give you some advice step by step for what to do when you do hear washing of hands or dog barking. Then what I would do is I would start the recording. See, the thing is, right, you just want to be able to contribute something to CatholicSG Radio with minimal work. You do not need to know any editing for now. And this is how you can help the editors at CatholicSG Radio cut a clean file. You see, a clean file is when you start reading and there's no dog barking and all that. What happens is that you start reading. So let's just say that I'll just read something here. Okay, thank you for being here with us this Saturday morning. God bless you all. Oops. Okay, I made a mistake. Then I just need to clear my throat. Then I just continue again. Thank you again for being here. Do not do that. You need to learn how to stop, pause, do everything you need to do, clear your throat, then wait a few seconds, and then start again. You need to give a few seconds of silence before you restart. And you don't need to redo the take. Say you've been given a gospel reading. You don't need to do from start to finish in one take, because that's quite impossible for most of us who are beginners. Just start with each sentence And let's say you made a mistake with the previous sentence, don't worry, just stop. After a couple of seconds of silence, compose yourself, redo that previous sentence that you made a mistake, and then you continue. As you're talking, dog barks, stop. Leave the recording on. Don't need to mess and stop here, stop there, restart. Just let the dog bark. Once dog finishes barking, wait a while, continue. And these are the simplest things you can just do to get your first recording done on your phone. And then it will be decent audio quality. And then when you send it to CatholicSG Radio, they have all the parts in between that they can cut out. They can cut out the dog barking, your clearing of your throat. When they hear all these things, they will know what you are trying to do. Yeah, I hope that made it simple. First tip.
But of course, if you can get to us a clean clip, that would be great as well. That means no dog in between and all that. So that's what some of our volunteers actually also do. They take the extra step to redo the recording so that we get everything all nicely done in one take. And this is something that you also can do for your own podcast, especially when you want to make sure that it's done well. So there is some pain involved in doing the podcast. Sometimes first timers, especially if you're doing it on your own and you want to do it for your own content, your own channel, you will have to do it nicely in one take lah. Hopefully without any too many blunders. Ernest, sorry I interrupted you, and I hope you can continue.
Yes, yeah. Okay, now I see a couple of questions from Veronica. How do we record with the earpiece and mic direct recording? Okay, what happens if we run out of recording time, right?
Yeah.
We'll tackle the questions later, right?
Yes, we will be tackling these questions later, but I just want to know if there's anything else you need to share before I'm going to switch over to Nicole and get her take on this question as well.
Okay, if you already have the smartphone, like I said, that's tip number 1, how to start, and then the recording techniques, I told you that's tip number 2. Tip number 3 is that all of us have, well, if you have these handphone earpiece, right, that you use to plug in to your phones, when you want to listen to music or make a call, these ones where you can speak into it, these are really good, like the ones that Nicole is using. You see, the difference is when you just use a phone and you speak over the top of it. The phone, right, is designed to take sound from all around you. Whereas when you use an earpiece and you plug it in, your voice just goes into this. It doesn't really take the sound that is around you. So the voice quality for this is actually cleaner. But when you listen back to 2 recordings, trust me, you do it after this, you do one with your raw phone and then one with this, you will find that the one with the phone, right, sounds louder because it's taking a lot of ambient room sound. But this is the one that sounds clearer and cleaner, and that is the one that is better for CatholicSG Radio. So that's tip number 3. Try to do your recordings with this. And then when you do your recordings, you just lean forward a little bit. Don't do this. Don't do the Sim Square thing and all that. Hello, and all. Do not do that. Do not. Just let it hang off your ears naturally. Just lean forward. Just be comfortable. And then you read your Bible passage. And then your phone is recording. You can just leave it on the table. That is really like the easiest way to start off immediately after this, which I'm sure all of you will do, right?
Okay,
the other thing is, the next cheapest gadget you can have let me just try and hear myself. Okay, the next cheapest gadget that you can have is something like this. This, if you see here, right, these are called little pocket directional mics. Okay, these are handphone accessories. You see, this one I bought is from Rode. It's an Australian brand. RODE. And it's called the Video Mic Me. It comes with a 3.5 mm jack if you want to use with Android phones. It also comes with a lightning cable for your iPhones. So I've used this for like 4 years already. At the cathedral, I shot a lot of stuff and all that. And just with this is $70 Singapore dollars, $70 is really cheap, and it did the job. Go and look at some of the early cathedral videos. All this is just done with that. And what I would do is I would just put this. Now this, right? With this, you just need to hold it in front of you, and it really is virtually like a mic. I'm using something like this now, but that's the next step, which I think Nicole will go into. But this is good enough. At $70, you just have to speak and it will capture. This will block out all the sound on the sides and behind. And your voice will be very clear through, decently clear through this. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to switch over right now to Nicole. Nicole, how about you give us your tips on how we can start off doing podcasts?
Yeah, so I think I also started off quite similarly to Ernest. So I started off with a earpiece. So today I'm on earpiece, but I do actually have a proper condenser mic. Very interestingly, actually a gift from my students. Yes, to support my podcasting efforts. I was actually quite touched when they gave it to me on Teacher's Day. Maybe it's really God's sign. But I just wanted to address some of the questions also here. Bernard was asking what happens if we run out of recording time. Well, let's say if you're using your phone to record, which is for most purposes, that's the device that we use. We won't really run out of recording time, but you may actually come into a bit of a problem if you're going on a particular hosting platform. So for example, for me, when I started out my podcast, I was on this free account in Podbean, and I realized that they gave me features for sure, but they actually kind of restricted the amount of recording time that I could actually have for each episode per month. But recently, I've actually upgraded. I've actually switched, more importantly, I've switched to another platform known as Anchor, right? And it actually kind of runs in Spotify. So everything is actually much easier in terms of there's no limit to the recording time. So you don't have to actually don't have to feel anxious about that, because that will definitely not be a problem. As for Jeannie's question about how best to organize your content coherently during ideation, so maybe I can share a bit about how I would actually come up with a podcast. So for me, the way that I think about podcasts at first was mainly about, I just reflect on the Sunday's reading. I give a bit of my personal reflection. I do a little bit of storytelling over there. And then I hopefully, kind of distill a few messages. But over time, a lot of people actually kind of reached out to me on my social media and Instagram and asked me to talk about specific things. For example, like discernment, right? Discerning the way forward, whether it's in terms of their relationships or their work, or just basically decision making, that kind of thing. So they gave me some general ideas, and that's actually where the ideas came from. For me, actually, at the start, the ideas were actually based on what I was talking about with some of my friends, what I thought would kind of appeal to different people. But I realized that what people actually wanted to hear were like really personal stories about the faith, right? And also, in terms of Jeannie's question about how many points or items are important, so I actually subscribe to the rule of 3 points. So I want to make mainly 3 points in my podcast. So I will start off with something. So I like to start off with a story, right? Or like maybe something very like inconsequential that I've just like kind of like experienced that day. It could be a worship song, it could be a conversation with a friend, and very similar to also what Ernest was saying, speaking to different people in the church as well, people that you might not really know much about, for example. So I'm also thinking about actually interviewing and talking to different people to really bring them in. So in terms of the number of points and items, I think that would be a good start. So just kind of think about what is your general idea and sort of like 3 main points that you want to make. So in terms of how to refocus it on the central message, I think it really is up to the person. Like every individual is different. The type of stories that we tell is also quite different. So you have to really, I think, make it your own. But I think the most important thing is that we're telling very genuine stories of the faith. So sometimes, like, the episodes that come out, it doesn't mean that all the time it seems like, I'm very super happy, super on and super high, and I'm feeling very excited about life, and my spiritual life is blooming and blossoming. Sometimes you're at a spiritual low, and sometimes we need to let our listeners or people that are listening to us know that the spiritual journey is not like a linear one. It's not like every day I'm experiencing like, these deep spiritual kind of like moments or something. Sometimes we find it very hard to find God. And if our listeners know that we are human as well, and that we are also struggling sometimes with certain aspects of the faith, it presents this kind of human aspect to everyone, and different people will kind of come to it in a different way. So I think what's important is that you find your own unique style of kind of presenting what you want to present, but also knowing that like when you are doing this particular podcast, really to pray to the spirit to really inspire you. Sometimes I might go like for a long time and not have like a single idea, but suddenly maybe a friend of mine will kind of contact me and say, oh, why don't you do like a series about 1 Corinthians, or like, oh, are you going to do a Lenten series? And then that really sparks a bit of the ideation. Sometimes if we just like try and focus on ourselves to like come up with all the ideas, is very very overwhelming, definitely. Like I'm sure that in private companies and everything, there's a whole team that actually kind of comes together to create the content. But I think if we can crowdsource a little bit and ask people like, what do you want to see? Then it becomes a bit of like a dialogue, right? Rather than like, I'm telling you that this is the faith, these are the challenges, but like, what do you want to hear about? Let me engage with you. And that's the sort of direction that I'm coming from. And I think that maybe you also would want to consider as well.
So just very quickly, I'll just quickly answer some of the other questions. The iPhone earpiece, yes, you can plug it into your MacBook, and that's perfect, like what Nicole is doing. That's good. Really good starting point already. The distance between the mouth and the mic, well, if you have something like what I have as a USB mic, you can go and do a Google search on these things, USB mic. It just plugs via USB. They're a bit more, they're about like some of the better ones are about $100 to about $150. Those are the really seriously good amateur stuff. That one, you can do it, you put it in front. That allows you to pull yourself away. Let's say if you are in podcast for CatholicSG Radio, where they have this series called Holy Moly, Who's That Saint? They say, oh, wow, wow. They're a bit more dramatic. They have to pull away. Whereas with the earpiece is a bit tricky because this is always near your mouth. So I would suggest, this is better for most things like scriptural readings where it's more or less constant. Yeah. Don't worry about, and don't do this. Don't try and pull the mic away from you, because that will just cause a lot of sound difference. Yeah. In terms of, like I said, you don't have to have a very good voice. You just have to have a clear voice. The other thing is, some of us may be shy. We don't want to express our voice yet. We may have other talents in music. Let's say if you are able to play the piano, or you're able to play the guitar or something like that, you can submit musical pieces to CatholicSG Radio, and they will actually have a listen. Of course, it must be actually in tune or something like that. And then they will actually consider playing it. I think Val can flesh out that. So these are various audio offerings. I would call it an audio offering to God. And I just do record bits and pieces of what I do, and I just pass it to Val. I don't even bother to ask her whether she played it. I just know that this is just my offering and this is what I can do, and hopefully it's good enough. So maybe Val can chime in here.
Yes, of course. For our, when we work with our volunteers on CatholicSG Radio, we do have people who actually submit to us edited audio content. And for those of you who are interested, actually, we will be following up after this seminar, not immediately, of course, but within the next course of 2 weeks, we will be rolling out another kind of like a workshop lah, call it that way, to go a little bit deeper into how to record and how to edit sounds. There was a question on how do you actually edit sounds, how do you get rid of background noises, how do you even include music into your audio recordings. A lot of this is done post-production. That means after you record, you put it together on a software. There are free software available. For us, we don't subscribe to any paid or expensive software. We ourselves use the free software. The one that we're using is called Audacity. So for those of you who are interested, we will be conducting that much later down, and you can keep a lookout for details on how we can do this. There are some other questions, but I do want to say this. We actually plan to run this session only right up till 10:15, and would you believe it? We're already at 10:20. So I'm going to ask Ernest and Nicole, are you okay for just a few more minutes to just answer some of these questions? I think there are one or maybe just one more question, perhaps. Any tips on how we can use wireless earbuds like AirPods for recording? And then after that, we will move on to wrap up the questions, unless if there's any other questions that's coming in.
Yes, you can. Okay. To that question, Leonard, right? You can use wireless earbuds. The other thing is when you're using wireless earbuds on a mobile phone, right? It's quite automatic. It will detect it. If you're using wireless earbuds with your MacBook or your Windows computer or your laptop, you just need to make sure you go into the computer settings right at the bottom left, and then do a search for your sound settings. Your sound settings, right? It should be configured to external headphone and external mic, because your wireless earbuds are those. Yeah. And of course, your Bluetooth has to be on. So that's the way to do that. You can use that. I find it depends. If you are using certain brands like, I don't know, I had a colleague who tried Jabra wireless and there was a lot of interference. So I think sometimes that's the problem with wireless earbuds. But do give a try. I've heard people use the wireless AirPods from Apple. Sound great. Yeah.
Okay, there's a
Yeah.
question, very interesting one. How do you actually cope with everybody working from home during circuit breaker? Very much we run everything from home. And I think, Ernest, you also run your professional podcast for Straits Times and Business Times from home. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. It's we use audio softwares that are out there. You guys can Google basically free podcast software, and then try and do this in the Google search, remote podcast software. Okay, so those are online websites where you sign in, you create a simple free account, and then basically you just connect with other people via email addresses, and then you invite them into the recording session, basically. And I think Nicole also has to do this as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So like actually all along I've been using like an online software. But actually like to answer the question about whether interviewing people over the mobile phone produces good enough, it does. It does. I have actually tried it before. So there are various types of software. The one I'm currently using now is called Anchor. And it actually allows you to record conversations that you have using the app, and then it will directly upload this file as a podcast. So you can actually do a lot of the editing within some of this software if you like to do so. Or if you want to, you can actually have another separate software as well. And that's also an answer to Veronica's question, how to upload the podcast on the web. So once you actually have access to this software and you are actually uploading these files in, basically it's just a little bit about, there's a bit of technical detail in terms of like trying to upload this content using RSS. So maybe we can leave that for another session. But just to give you a brief summary, and just very quickly, just to answer Jeannie's question about what kind of starter hook works best for podcasts, I think it's really up to you. I can just give a few suggestions very briefly. It could be a song, right? Maybe a worship song that you like. I think a lot of us really appeal to music very well, right? We actually find a lot of resonance with that. It could be a conversation that you had. It could be a prayer that you have been praying, right? Or that you are starting to pray, or it could even be a Bible verse. So I think just actually starting with something simple with which you have a personal connection will help you to sort of start the entire process.